Hello. The last video I uploaded was over 8 months ago, and the reason for that is because I was studying. I was being a good student, but that's over now. I got my grades back, I passed, and I didn't really have any incentive to make a video. I felt like, a lot of the opinions that I hold were being represented really well by other people. And, what my channel was mostly all about was sort of like challenging atheists and well, that's what the original intent was, and then I went into things like Unitarianism and preterism, and I felt like that's all been discussed now. That's all open. There's great resources out there, and I said everything I wanted to say about it. But the reason I'm back today is because I was watching a video. Jordan B. Peterson put up a video where he puts up these little clips now. It's like Jordan B. Peterson clips or something. And in one of the videos, he is asked by presumably an atheist, "Are you a Christian?" And the short answer that Jordan Peterson gives is yes. And then the atheist asks him, "Well, do you believe in the resurrection of Jesus?" And you can kind of tell what this person was trying to do with that question. They were trying to play that atheist card where it's like, first of all, I'm very surprised that you're not in my team. I hate that you're a Christian. Do you really believe that someone was resurrected from the dead? It's asked in a sort of like, are you an idiot? Are you so stupid that you would believe that an actual human being who died came back to life? And you're going to tell me you believe in that? And I just hated the spirit in which that question was asked. I detest that smug, dishonest line of questioning. The person who asked wasn't genuinely interested in whether or not Jordan B. Peterson believed in it. He was more interested in the fact of, well, whether or not he could score a little point for Team Atheism by exposing this person as someone who believes in something inherently irrational. And you can tell by the answers that Jordan B. Peterson gave that this atheist was dissatisfied that he didn't out and out state that he was against the idea of Jesus being bodily resurrected. Now, I will state for the record that there are Christian groups or people who purport to be Christians. I would say they're safe, they're Christians, who don't believe in the bodily resurrection of Christ. And you know what? In the comments section of this little clip, there was, because Jordan P. Peterson said he was agnostic on whether or not he believed in the bodily resurrection. Every group pretty much, I mean, it's got more likes than dislikes, but there was very dissatisfied Christians as well as probably dissatisfied atheists. They didn't give a conclusive answer. He said he was agnostic about it, and I think that's fair, because I feel like Jordan P. Peterson's someone who wants to take you along with his rationale, and given the limited scope he had to answer that question, he didn't feel like he would be justified in giving a yes or no, so I felt like he was pressured to say, I'm agnostic about it. I would probably have given a more decisive answer at the time, but he's probably not the kind of person that likes to do that. So yeah, a lot of Christians in particular are like, you're not a Christian, Jordan, because if you were a Christian, you would have said yes to the bodily resurrection. However, as I said, there are Christian groups who don't believe in the physical resurrection and instead believe in a more spiritual resurrection. That's the point to be taken away. And in the past, I would have been against that myself. I would have said, well, that you're not a Christian then. You have to believe in the bodily resurrection. But I don't know about that now, because I think if you actually say that I believe in the resurrection, but in a spiritual sense, I mean, you have to ask yourself what matters more, and what's the value in a belief. If you believe that Jesus was raised from the dead bodily, what does that do? I mean, what does that make you think? If it's just the words Jesus was resurrected bodily, that's quite vacuous. However, if you don't believe in that, but you do believe in the significance of it and what that actually means, and you've got a fleshed out, nuanced and sophisticated understanding of what that might entail and what that could mean in a spiritual sense, and you've taken some kind of truth from that that's of great significance, then perhaps that's more valuable than the simple belief of the bodily resurrection. But it's one of these tenuous issues that I'm just trying to be a bit open minded towards. However, to those atheists who believe that it's really silly to believe in the bodily resurrection of Christ, that's retarded. There's no evidence for that. It's just an insane belief. Well, actually, it's not. It's not an insane belief. Is there evidence? Is there reasons? Are there certain facts that I, as a Christian, can look at and use to inform myself on the question, to give a solid answer, to work me toward an answer? And the answer to that is yes, there are facts that I can look to. So, is it even a serious question? Is the resurrection a serious question? Well, it is. There's hundreds of scholarly articles and books devoted to this subject in universities across the world. This question is taken seriously, and scholars agree that there are an irreducible historical core to the resurrection that cannot be explained away as pious legend or wholesale deceit. So there's something of substance to it, and we'll get into that here. Professor Ed Sanders, who is a historian of ancient antiquity at the skeptical end of mainstream scholarship, says that Jesus' followers, and later Paul, had resurrection experiences, and in his judgment, this is a fact. What the reality was that gave rise to the experience, I don't know. So that's one of the skeptics who's an expert in the field saying there was certainly a resurrection experience, but what that entails exactly, I'm not quite sure. And you gotta really feel the weight of such statements. Here's a Jew. His name is Pinchas Lapide, and I probably massacred that pronunciation. Pinchas Lapide. He's a German scholar of ancient Judaism and Christianity, and a practising Jew, and he had this to say. After deliberating on how peasants, shepherds, and fishermen who betrayed and denied their master went on to become confident mission society, convinced of salvation and able to work with much more success after Easter than before Easter, no vision or hallucination is sufficient to explain such revolutionary transformation. He says, if defeated and depressed group of disciples overnight could change into a victorious movement of faith based only on autosuggestion or self-deception without a fundamental faith experience, then this would be a much greater miracle than the resurrection itself. In a purely logical analysis, the resurrection of Jesus is the lesser of two evils, and for those who seek a rational explanation of the worldwide consequences of that Easter faith. Now that's quite extraordinary. Here we have a Jew, a Sadducee of all. And if you don't know what a Sadducee is, it's a sect of Judaism who do not believe in the afterlife. So here's an expert in his field, a man who would not have given in lightly to stories of a resurrected Christ. He's a practising Jew in the modern age. And after deliberating over the evidence himself as an expert, he was shaken and he had no choice but to embrace, I have to speak over the sounds of certain noises in the background that might be slightly unappetizing, such as the sound of piss. Okay. Right, so in a purely logical analysis, the resurrection of Jesus is the lesser of two evils. This is what this man was forced to come out and admit. Oh my God. I think that's the pissing over. Okay, hopefully that doesn't make it onto the camera. So, moving from the Sadducee sect, he had to embrace a more agnostic position because he could no longer hold on to his beliefs. That's huge. That's pretty huge. Now, there are two historical facts regarding the resurrection story. These are two historical facts that historians have agreed upon. There's always that one, and you can probably, the one I'm talking about, Richard Carrier. He's like, there was no such thing as Jesus. That's on the whack job conspiracy theorist end. That's not even in the mainstream scholarship. That's just like a stringent anti-theist, anti-Christian rhetoric that's not based in fact, but it's just a more arbitrary form of skepticism that we find very frequently online. But the two historical facts regarding the resurrection story that most scholars agree upon are that the tomb was empty shortly after Jesus' burial, and that it was witnessed by a lot of people, and that eyewitness testimony is important for reasons we'll get into. But the fact that the tomb was empty follows the criterion of multiple attestation, and also without the empty tomb, there would be evidence to discredit Christianity before the whispers of the movement left Jerusalem. So you have to imagine, you can lie about such a thing in Rome, but you can't lie about such a thing in the place where the event transpired. They can't turn around and say, Jesus was resurrected, because then everyone would go and point to the tomb with the body in it and say, no, he wasn't. That's his body right there. And we don't see that in the historical record. The evidence tells us that this was first announced in the city of Jesus' death and burial. And another source that adds credibility to this is the fact that, the first century Jewish counterclaim to the resurrection was that the disciples themselves had stole the body. So you might think to yourself, well, doesn't that put you a disadvantage here? Doesn't that take away credibility? And the answer to that is no. It in fact adds credibility to the Christian narrative, because it tells us that the original contention wasn't about whether or not the body was gone. The body was gone. The contention was over the means by which that body disappeared. That's significant. Okay? And Geza Vermes, a great Jewish philosopher from Oxford University, he regards it as reasonably convincing that the entourage of Jesus discovered an empty tomb and were definite that it was the tomb. He also notes that the rumour that the apostles stole the body is most improbable. And you can imagine there's many reasons for why it's improbable, and I'll get to them. The next fact that adds credibility to the resurrection is, again, as I mentioned before, it's the eyewitness testimony claiming to have seen him alive again. It is in fact beyond dispute that significant numbers of men and women claimed to be eyewitnesses to the risen Christ. Even skeptical scholar Ed Sanders mentions, among a list of what he describes as secure facts, his disciples fled. They saw him, in what sense is not certain, after his death. Okay, so from that we know that this story of resurrection is not the result of growing legend. We know that as a fact because of the timeline here. We can date 1 Corinthians right back to the time of Jesus, and this is attested by atheist scholars like James Dunn, the skeptical end. I'm not talking about pro-Christian scholarship here. This is the secular study of these things by historians, and they attest the facts. And also, another thing that adds credibility here is the testimony of women in the Bible, because women were regarded as invalid sources of testimony in the first century. Now, again, you might turn to me and say, well, William, doesn't that put you at a disadvantage? Are you not hurting your own argument here by mentioning this fact? And I'm not, because this checks the criterion of embarrassment, which affirms that reports that are likely to have caused some embarrassment to a writer, but are nonetheless offered, are likely to be reliable, since we tend not to make ourselves look silly in public if it can be helped. So, that testimony wouldn't be in there if this guy was trying to write a convincing narrative. But the fact that it is in there just goes to attest to the fact that he is just recording events as he remembers them. Okay? So, in the very beginning, the tomb was found empty, and it was announced that Jesus was risen, and thus it wasn't an invented legend. But, this raises the question, could the disciples have colluded, stolen the body, and put together this far-reaching fraud? Could they have arranged that? And the answer is, Well, yes, of course, it is possible, but there is no serious scholar who thinks that this is at all likely the case. First, those who would be inventing the story preserved sayings of their master calling for absolute honesty. Now, this could be seen as part of the cover story to inspire credibility, but again, that goes back to this idea of like arbitrary skepticism, which isn't really based in fact, it's just skepticism for the sake of skepticism. You know, there is no adequate motive for deception here. The apostles were not enriched by their message. They were, they experienced social estrangement, loss of property, loss of religious status. They didn't do a good job for themselves if their intention was to acquire wealth and status and positions of power, because they were imprisoned, they were whipped, they lost property, and a lot of them incurred the death penalty for their beliefs. And there's clear evidence that at least 4 of the key eyewitnesses died: John, Zebedee, James, the brother of Jesus, Peter, and Paul. Now, you might kill for a false belief, you might even die for a false belief, but it's really unlikely that you would do either of those things for something that you yourself made up. If you're in the position to know that the belief is fake because you made it up, you're much less likely to put yourself in harm's way. If you look to the writings of the Prophet Muhammad, if you read the kind of things that he says Allah is telling him, these are things that enrich his life. Muhammad was never put in a position of like, oh, you know what? I'm going to give up all my status. I'm going to give up all my wealth because God has told me that a humble life is the way forward. Muhammad of the scriptures of the Quran never said that. The Muhammad of the Quran acquired wealth and acquired nations and power and status through his divine mediation with God. But it wasn't divine, was it? No, it wasn't. Anyways, that's my 2 cents on this issue. So, as I say, I'm really annoyed when atheists make this argument that, oh, there's no reason to believe in the resurrection. You'd have to be a retard. That's the only reason. And that's just offensive and silly, because, as I've stated here, there are reasons. What I've just stated are reasons to believe. And this is only part of the evidence. There is so much more you could use to substantiate the bodily resurrection. So yeah, that's why I felt inspired to make this video today, was just to justify a belief and show the evidence of a bodily resurrection. Okay, all the best. Take care. God bless.